So Natalie, for those people that don't know you, could you give yourself a little introduction, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm an integrative psychotherapist. So I worked in this space of mental and metabolic health for the last 18 years. So I help people understand root cause mental health, metabolic health, and help people understand how their minds work. That's it in a nutshell.
It's brilliant. Do you deal with addiction or depression, or do you have a sort of broad remit?
Yeah. So everything from, I like to call them attachments. Don't really like the anchored word of addictions because it comes with a very different energy space in our bodies. So I always like to use the word attachment. So drugs, alcohol, food, and also, yeah, the prevalence of, generalized anxiety disorders and depression. Yeah.
I see. So, you're saying that people are attached to these types of foods rather than addicted. Is that basically it?
Yeah, so a lot of it also just comes back to understanding our precognitive behavior, which is between 0 to 7 and 7 to around 12, 13 years of age. And our environment and what we view plays a very, very, very big part in what we become attached to. So what I'm basically saying is every single thing that you view, hear, sense, touch, taste in those times in your environment, they're the things that anchor you and your emotional behavior. So if, for example, you're around a lot of alcohol use or using food as treats or, watching parents, generally, it's mums normally, dads really don't diet too much. But if we're seeing, our mum's diet and they're using food as a tool to shrink our bodies and not really looking at it as a mental health or a nutritional therapy, we tend to use our emotions and anchor them in things outside of ourselves, such as food, alcohol, drugs, because we learn that by what we see. And then if we don't understand that, then that's what basically becomes our predictive past becomes our predictive future. So you end up doing the same things that your unconscious mind deems as normal, even though it may not be normal.
Yeah, I mean, and not knowing what normal is or thinking that a certain thing is normal because that's what happened to you is a big deal, isn't it? Because if there's a child at home and he's seeing whatever he's seeing, and that's normal because that's what my parents do, so I'm going to do that. But these bad habits are obviously inherited from somewhere, and I think, you know, I would always say this about genetics. People talk about genetics, but they forget about the nurture side. I was not forced to eat, but that's what the family ate. I had skim milk and, no red meat, no saturated fat. And I did that for many years up until age 50. I totally believed it was the best thing to do, even though, even in the evidence, my dad died when I was 10, my mum died when I was 23, and so did the girlfriend when I was in my 20s. So these people all eating this fantastic way that the guidelines suggested all died. So, but I still at it. It didn't wake me up. But that's probably not what you deal with. You deal more with the person that can't give it up. And
Yeah, but I really love that statement, Steve, was, about waking up. So 95% of what we do as human beings and what I call our human construct literally controls our lives. 95% of what we do every single day is unconscious. And your mind is literally a massive filing cabinet full of data. And if you don't change that data input, you're going to get the same data output. So when I hear people say, I know this is not healthy for me, but I keep doing the same things over and over and over. And there's a reason for that, because there's no new evidence. You have to actually understand, one, how your conscious works with your unconscious, but also your body. Emotions around food are so anchored. And, we definitely as humans, as anyone that follows me, I call we are a species and we should be eating a species appropriate way. But our emotions get in the way because we use food as comfort or entertainment, which again is a really slippery slope. So if you think about it, same data gives you the same evidence. So if you're operating from your past, you're going to get the same evidence in the next 12 months, 5 years, 10 years, unless you are conscious in the present moment, because that's all we have. So we have to change that right here and now. Give yourself new data, which then creates the new evidence. So if you keep saying I'm addicted to sugar, or I'm addicted to alcohol, or I'm an addict, that's the old data. You're going to get the same evidence. You've got to change your language. And language is huge. I think a lot of people don't understand how powerful your narrative is about yourself, and you may not even hear it half the time.
So how do you make the people realize? I mean, the fact they've visited you surely means they've woken up and they've admitted something's not right.
Well, I think when most people find me, they have been to therapy for many years, possibly done all different types of maybe coaching work. But for me, I'm very clear on how I work. Obviously, I've been carnivore myself now for 5 years, and I use nutritional, therapy as such. That it's to help you understand the power of real food, and the next part of that is really just diving into your mind and helping people become very conscious. My work's really uncomfortable. It's quite confronting, but I think when people are ready, they're ready. And that's how they kind of find me. They're like, okay, I'm done now. Just, let's go through this resistance. Because if you keep resisting things, they get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were speaking to Pim Jansen earlier, sort of a very similar sort of conversation. We were talking about, relearning or rethinking, not repeating the same mistakes, I suppose. So how does Carnivore help your job?
Well, in many ways, it really just allows people to, and also to, even with disordered eating, that's also an attachment process around emotions and self-worth. So I use the Carnivore protocol purely as a reset, both mind, body, spirit, and energetically, because your body's also an unconscious process. So, by feeding and fueling yourself in the correct manner, you then start to have a window that opens for you. And it doesn't take very long, as you guys know, and anyone that's kind of followed this collective carnivore community, 2 weeks is where that window starts to open. And I think a lot of people really don't count their ability to heal themselves and to actually really understand the power of human species appropriate nutrition. And one, because it's full of nutrition, it's full of amino acids, and that's what we need. But secondly, it also puts people back into control of understanding thoughts, feelings, and patterns, which is what I do. And Carnivore is one of the most powerful ways for that to happen. I think the decentralized, movement versus centralized movement gives people back their power to understand that they do have control over how they think, how they feel. But you can't just put your head over on the left and then put your body on the right and think it's going to work together. It's not. You've got to align them all together.
Yeah. Now, there's a question about you personally, if you don't mind, a personal question. Neville is asking, how did going on the carnivore diet help you?
Yeah, amazing. Great question. Thank you, Neville. So it was over 5 years ago now, and I originally was from a bodybuilding background. Before I was actually a psychotherapist, I was in corporate land for 20 years and was a bodybuilder. Now, knowing what I know, I'd probably never do that again in the way that I did it there. I would do it very differently. So I was at a very high carb, very low chicken breast, broccoli diet for many, many years. And unfortunately, I ended up getting myself into insulin resistance, which I didn't know back then what that was. And it wasn't until I woke up one day and my face was numb and I was like, oh, this is not good. So I went to my doctor at the time and he had said to me, well, maybe you will check out what's going on. Came back that I was insulin resistant. I was type 2 borderline diabetic. I was 59 kilos. I didn't look diabetic. However, the long frame of being a bodybuilder and eating a lot of high carbohydrates and training like a crazy person, cardio every day, doing a stressful job really got me into a lot of problems. So I had spoken to my doctor and he said, well, just keep an eye on it. And I said, no, we're not going to keep an eye on it. And because even when I just want to take it back a little bit too, when I'd finished the bodybuilding industry, I was still eating the same way because I didn't really understand the concept of, carnivore. And, even though with my original training, it was kind of low carb, kind of, working with clients from that point, but carnivore was never in my mind. But it wasn't until up and 5 years ago when that happened. And I said, okay, we're not going to keep an eye on it. I'm just going to go zero carb. And I did that. Now I probably jumped in. I wouldn't do that now. I jumped in pretty quickly, which, as you know, your microbiome goes a little crazy and you won't want to do that. You had to stay in the house probably for a while without giving away too much information. So for me, I just did that. And then all of a sudden my energy started to come back. I stopped counting calories. I stopped weighing my food. My asthma disappeared. My eczema disappeared. My insulin resistance reversed. And then all my hay fever and everything, all my allergies disappeared as well. So that was just an extra bonus. But since then, I could not imagine my life without it. And the same thing with clients. Once they get that window and your body starts to get the right information, like food is messages. We really we misunderstand that. And so for me, I live in my best.
Dipping out a second again there, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think
That answered the question.
Yes.
I have my Ethernet plugged into my modem because I know.
Yeah, we lost a little bit there, but I think we got the overall gist, didn't we, Richard?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think definitely is, when telling us all the things that reversed, we got most of that list. So I think that's pretty good. So it's helped you, which obviously helped you in your practice as well, because you thought, well, if this works, I could try it with other people. Do you get a sort of high percentage of take up when you suggest this way of eating might be helpful for the mental health problems? Or do people come to you who've already decided, oh, you're the person to go to because of the carnivore thing that you do?
Yeah, I'm pretty clear on the way that I, put my message out. So people definitely know that I sit in the carnivore nutritional therapy healing process with mental and, metabolic health. So most people pretty much know. They follow me for a while and they understand where I'm at. So, I think they know by reaching out to me that's going to be a very, very front conversation. There will obviously be versions of that, depending on where each person sits, and I will cater that to, who's sitting in front of me. But ultimately, especially with alcoholism, I'm having an amazing response with, the carnivore protocol, obviously with ketosis. It's very little talked about in the community, and I think the research is really not as strong. But, with alcoholism, being in ketosis is just extremely powerful, and I'm seeing amazing results with my clients.
So is it
also
really
too,
that
people don't talk about that either, right? No one. Yeah. Yep.
What don't they talk about? Sorry, what?
Yep.
The ketosis element and alcoholism.
Oh, so Well, also drugs and alcohol. So, if I'm talking about cocaine attachment and alcohol, they normally generally go hand in hand. And what happens is a lot of that is sugar, right? So if you watch anyone that is an alcoholic or is a cocaine attachment, that all their diets is carbs. It's all high processed carbs and sugars. Now that obviously is an attachment, and through those chemical pathways of just, your dopamine being hit all the time, but you've got carbohydrate hit, dopamine hit with alcohol, drugs, and food. It's a huge pathway that if you're just saying to someone, hey, let's just, get you to not want to drink or not want to take drugs, but your self-image is not really good. But then also too, you're not talking about diet. And if you go to an AA meeting and you're trying to get people not to drink, and every single thing on the table is full of sugar, and that's, again, no one talks about the power of sugar when you're trying to not relapse or try to get someone off those attachments, because every single time there is alcohol, sugar, and cocaine, they're always in that circle. So, getting the body out of that craving state and feeding it most powerful sources of food that you can, everything starts to come down. But then you're allowed to manage the conscious and unconscious pattern of why someone starts to use, external sources to make themselves feel better.
Yeah, I was just before Steve jumps in, because I know there's a slight delay. I think, it's very much a case of, is it the cart before the horse sometimes? Because, and I think you can probably attest to this, but when we look at things like dopamine in particular, I mean, insulin resistance, as you were in a state of insulin resistance, that interferes with the absorption of phenylalanine and tyrosine, which we need to create dopamine, which drives this the sugar addiction and our requirement for sugar, because we're hardwired to chase dopamine, and if we don't get a dopamine fix naturally, we start to chase it, and it's a similar thing when it comes to serotonin. Serotonin is created from tryptophan, and when we consume sugar, this increases insulin. And insulin will drive or pull all amino acids out of the blood, but it'll leave tryptophan available for synthesis, which means every time we eat something sweet, we get the dopamine and the serotonin fixes, but they're short-lived. So what do we do when, because we're hardwired to chase these things, what do we do when they crash? Well, we go for another drug of choice, as it were. And then it's this constant sort of up and down of we're in this chasing our tail state, if you like, of constant dopamine and serotonin fixes. But when we look at the catecholaminergic neurotransmitter synthesis, the catecholamines, they come from 3 amino acids: tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine, which we can get from food, and that's fine. But the biggest thing that's dawned on me, I mean, we speak about ketosis and how powerful it is for addiction and for the brain, and all of this is heavily evidence-based, and we can get right into that. But I think even if we take a step back ever so slightly, and we don't even pigeonhole ketosis and carnivore, if we look at how these amino acids are synthesized, they involve cofactors, things like zinc, iron, magnesium, vitamin B6, vitamin B12, so on and so forth. These cofactors can be blocked by as much as 100% if we eat foods that contain lectins and phytic acid. So even without coining this, a keto lifestyle, even just removing grains, and grains in particular, nuts and seeds or something, vegetables in general, some of the big hitters, then we allow our body to produce these neurotransmitters. And bread, I think, was the catalyst for me, because bread is also treated with glyphosate, and glyphosate blocks the shikimate pathway, and the shikimate pathway allows us to feed and produce 95% of the neurotransmitters in our gut. So I think even just coming away from being ketogenic and carnivore and just removing some of the most toxic compounds, we can alleviate a lot of the anxiety and depression, and we can feel happy, because this is what our neurotransmitters do, isn't it? I used to suffer severely with anxiety and depression. I never once thought that it was to do with the food that we eat. And I've got a story that I quite often tell, and I'll get into that if we've got time after this, Natalie. But I used to suffer severely, but just removing bread was the catalyst that allowed me to move forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I couldn't even remember the last time, obviously, I had bread, but even just understanding that connection between, the dopamine pathways. And the other thing, and I love that you said that, we are hardwired to hunt for dopamine, but unfortunately, we're not earning it in the right way, which is exactly what you just mentioned, Richard. We're earning it from our phones. We're earning it from, crappy food. We're earning it from, video games, and totally centered by hitting that pathway, when earning it traditionally is going for a run, moving your body, listening to some music. That's how we earn, the dopamine as human beings. And most of my clients that will come to me that are either, attached to severe end of things with alcohol and cocaine, their bread intake is insane. And so is their white pasta intake. Like, it's not uncommon. And I'm like, okay, let's just start there. But again, we have the emotional connection as well, right? Because it's like they're focusing, and the mind's trying to focus on reducing or alleviating alcohol. And now it's like, oh, now you're going to take my bread away from me, because we've anchored our emotions in that. And that's one of the other big issues that I work with, so that you become free from external attachments, including food.
Yeah, fantastic. How would you typically implement that if someone were to come and see you? Obviously, you've already said that they know that you are predominantly animal-based or carnivore. So I'm guessing they're already going to expect to be consuming more animal proteins. But is there a specific protocol that you would introduce, and would it be the same for everybody, or would it change depending on the circumstance and where that person is along their journey?
Yeah, no, look, the first 2 weeks I have a specific protocol that they have to follow to literally get them out of, the South Australian or American diet, where one meal at a time, because we don't want to end up, again, having to stay home and close to the toilet. So the first 2 weeks, yes, but then also too, what I do get them to do, I actually work with an integrative GP here in Melbourne, and I start with lots of blood work, really just see where they're at, and then we use a specific, program for each individual person. But in saying that, if you look at the plate, 90%, 95% of the food is always animal-based. But again, we're leaning down, carbohydrates, white things, flours, sugars, pales, all of those horrendous things, and then slowly bringing it down. And then each person will hit their sweet spot, and then we'll go from there. But what I find with most people, once they start to feel alive and really in control of their conscious, unconscious in their body and how they're actually operating, which they've never thought they could ever do, most people just go straight, I'm just doing straight carnivore, I'm done. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, so I think, one of the reoccurring questions is, because we've had some incredible experts, yourself included, on, during the last, what are we now, 16, 17, 18 and a half hours. And I think the general consensus is that, eating animal proteins, an evolutionary appropriate diet, is certainly the way forward. But everyone seems to have slightly different approaches. I think some have the thought process that, rip the Band-Aid off and go straight into strict carnivore. And, this is a question that we've been asking a few of the other guests, and I think you've just answered that for me in regards to incremental changes, making small changes over going deep in. Is that right?
Yeah, great, Richard. One of the biggest things that my clients say to me, because that's exactly what happened. So that they have this, I guess, thought that the minute if you do that and someone has a very strong attachment to themselves and they're very comfort food, you know, what you're doing is you're putting your client into what I call this, and most of the time when you do that too quickly, the body goes into a very resistant state. So in that, it's all about making sure that my client's value structures are actually embedded correctly first before I even talk about food. We do one thing at a time, but the most powerful thing when we start to transition is making sure that people actually have a very high value on their mental and metabolic health, which then we anchor the right food to feed that value. If you order yourself and you've got a very bad diet mentality and you're emotionally attached to food, then that can cause a lot of resistance where people will then, what we call, they fall off the bandwagon, they get back on, they fall off the train, they get back on. And that's the problem, because the external power is being held in the food and not looking at the emotional anchor of someone's self-worth, self-image, and their value. Because a lot of people, I know this is going to sound strange, but a lot of people that I work with, there's not one of them has ever had an internal agreement consciously and unconsciously with the relationship with themselves. Hence why they then anchor themselves externally with things. So we have to actually look at that, teach people how their minds work around food. How does food feel? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What happens, on that? And then the food piece becomes quite easy. Once you look at it from the opposite direction, people start to feel really good about themselves and they value their mental and metabolic health. They will automatically want to anchor themselves in things at a high frequency, which is what I call food. Food has a frequency. You're either in a low frequency from where you've been operating most of your life, and you'll meet low frequency food. That's just a pretty, standard quantum physics kind of, structure. So if we raise your vibration internally and give your mind new data, which creates new evidence about yourself, and you like and you love yourself, then food will meet you at that vibration. So if you don't like or love yourself, it's very challenging to then implement a protocol around nutrition that is going to meet you there. Because if you have to like and love yourself deeply to be able to want to heal yourself and to be able to want to actually use food to do that.
Yeah, and it's
did that help? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And it, you mentioned self-worth. As you know from speaking previously, I came from a bodybuilding background. And I don't know if this was the same with you, but I should imagine it was. But the reason I did that was because I had a very low opinion of myself. And many people think that when you compete in, a sport like bodybuilding, that people think that you love your body, you love yourself. But quite often, it's more to do with this pursuit of external justification, I guess. You want someone else to tell you that you're worthy, which is the wrong way to go about it, isn't it? But I competed for years and years and years, and I hated the way I look. But now that I've come away from that, I wish I looked like this now. But at the time, I really didn't like it. But the fact is now, I know that I'm fitter and healthier now, being half the size and not as ripped and as shredded. But it's that resonates a lot because how we visualize or see ourselves, and as you say, we need to be able to manifest, and I think that's an incredibly powerful tool. So yeah, that resonates a lot.
Absolutely. And, it is, I'm totally agreement. Like the bodybuilding industry and the fitness industry, if you look at people externally, yes, your perception is that they're in love with themselves and their body. And, me being in it as well, that was the total opposite. I had, and it wasn't, obviously I didn't know at the time because I didn't understand what negative self-image was, but I had a terrible conflicted and poor self-image about myself. And that was just due to, again, my external environment when I was growing up and humans wanting to be validated externally. And it's a very unhealthy space to be. And once you really understand the power of that and how to turn it around, you look at your body and your mind in such a different way, and I think anything can be externally validated, but once you validate yourself, anything else on the outside is like, oh, that's great, thank you. But your body and your mind are seeking it and hunting for it. And that, I think that's the power of understanding value and self-love. But your conscious mind and your unconscious mind have to agree. And what I mean by that, if I get everyone that actually watches now or in the replay, think about the last time you said that you were proud of yourself or that you loved yourself. You're going to get a pretty strong resistance and reaction, both internally and externally. You're not going to believe it. And that's the problem. That's the other thing with positive thinking. If you say that you love yourself or you're proud of yourself, I'll guarantee your unconscious is going to tell you something different. And you're going to have a reaction in your body where it's like, oh, don't really believe that. Or even talking about self-love, a lot of people feel very uncomfortable. Your body gives you a reaction because it doesn't believe it.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I was recently speaking at an event, and one of the questions was, put your hand up if you love yourself. And I was at the back of the room, so I didn't think anybody can see me, but I didn't put my hand up. I've always had a negative opinion of myself, and I still to this day struggle with it. But somebody came to me after and said, I noticed you didn't put your hand up. And my answer to that was, well, I couldn't honestly put my hand up because I don't believe it. But what advice would you, I've transformed my life from being clinically obese and type 2 diabetic. You know my story. And I think when I take a step back that I've achieved a lot, but I still have a negative opinion. I still sometimes feel not worthy. What advice, what words of wisdom could you part on to allow me to combat that and try to have more self-worth moving forward?
Really have to look at where your values lie. So a lot of the time when I talk about relationship values, our minds will go external, and we're pretty quick. We can come up with what our external values are around relationships, whether it's intimate or colleagues or whatever it may be. But if I asked you to actually go internally and say, well, you tell me what your relationship values are with yourself, a lot of the time, that's where you're going to get a lot of blank because they don't exist. Because again, if you have no or resistance around saying that you're worthy or loved, that means that you're not living consciously or unconsciously in an alignment with your values. So your data is still external, not internal. So what I mean by that is if you look at love, for example, as a value, you could easily know what that looks like and sounds like and feels like externally. But then if I asked you to say, okay, what does that look like, sound like, feel like for me internally? You're going to get a little bit of resistance and probably not a lot of information will appear because the other way I'll get you to look at it is the values that we learn are from that 0 to 7 years of age and 7 to 12. So they are all external. And the only way to make sure that they're internal is you have to rebuild them. You have to give your mind the new data, which then creates new evidence. So, for example, you do that. Should tell me how you love yourself. You won't have a resistance or an automatic response to probably move away or shrink or feel uncomfortable. So we need to build up the new filing cabinet, that I call them, with internal values. And a lot of people don't love themselves. They don't even like themselves. The other value structures are things like trust, honesty. How well do you trust yourself? How well are you honest with yourself? How well do you communicate with yourself? A lot of the time that they don't exist either.
Yeah. So how would we go about reinforcing those then from scratch? Any hints and tips? What typically would you do with the client? And again, is it the same protocol, or would it be different depending on where they were?
With helping people understand their value structures, it's a very set protocol, because pretty much everyone's conscious and unconscious mind, there'll be little nuances, but a lot of the time, everyone pretty much sits in the same category. So one of the strongest things that I get people to do is really understand where their conscious and unconscious is operating from, and through direct questioning. So I also use psychotherapy as a part of my work to bypass conscious, analytical, critical part thinking, and to get the information from the unconscious to the top, so that people can actually understand, hold on, I thought I loved myself, but clearly I don't, because what's been shown and what's come up is in total opposition to that. So it's not just the relationship with yourself, that's one part of it, but also too, it steeps out into career values, lifestyle values, health values. So they all have to be linked to mental and metabolic health. So the other thing, coming back to that, you cannot have a high value of your mental and metabolic health if you don't have a relationship with yourself. And the other thing that I see with people, they'll say to me, yeah, sure, I like myself, or yes, I value my mental and metabolic health. But then we look at their actions and it's in total opposition, because people are also too scared about what other people are going to think or feel if they change their way of eating, or they start to kind of look at themselves and wake themselves up internally, because then that affects our external environment. People get uncomfortable with change.
Yes. Is this a reason, or an excuse that people would use then, maybe to self-sabotage, and in regards to being worried about what other people will think, and not being able to adhere to what they would deem to be a stricter lifestyle? I mean, you and I know that this is, I don't find it restrictive now. I think it's highly indulgent. I love
far from strict. Far from strict.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's what type of protocol would you implement moving forward once you've established that connection and that love for oneself? Would it be then strict carnivore again, or would it be still a case of incremental changes?
Yeah, so it depends on the process with each person and where they're at when I do that. So we've really got to get that foundational value structures built, and then they have to operate in that every day. So there's a set structure that I give them that they have to actually sit and operate to recreate in the present moment those new value structures. And then what I find is when we make additional changes and add in, take out lots of the vegetables, take out the fruit, all of a sudden they have a feeling within themselves that they love themselves and they actually really enjoy feeling who they are. It's a very natural progression, because they're like, wow, this makes me feel good, and again, it's like, you've got to own how you want to feel. So if you're going to choose something and that's against your value structure, well, then we've got to say, well, why do we do that? Obviously, there's an element of self-sabotage there, but once you start to build them up consistently and live in them presently, we don't live in the past. We can't wait for the future. So what I mean by that is, you can't wait to get somewhere in the future and then feel better. It's like, I'm can't wait until I lose 5 kilos and that'll be in the future, because I'll guarantee you do that and you won't feel any different. Same thing. It's like, happiness is not at the end of the rainbow. You get to create it now. The future does not exist. It's in the current moment that you must feel everything that you need to feel to create that new evidence. So it is really, I cannot stress it enough. The internal powerful mechanisms of value is what really changes the dynamics of people, external food sources and things like that. But the other thing too, strict carnivore or strict diet, what we have to understand is that's just a societal program. We've all been programmed by certain thoughts, feelings, and views from society. Now, when we think about strict, you've got to kind of say, well, hold on, how strict is living in a body that doesn't work properly? How strict is it that not having, energy? How strict is it, that you've got anxiety and depression and you're attached to everything externally and you're seeking and hunting validation? That's strict. That controls your life. So, if we look at it from a point of, well, what does carnivore and what does, eating a species appropriate way give me? It's all a mindset change around the way strict has been anchored, and we have to change the value of it. Because I'll tell you right now, I've never had any client of mine that has ever said, oh my gosh, I wish I could go back to the way I used to eat because I felt so much better. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, since gravitating this way, I find it incredibly indulgent. I could eat beef and lamb every day. I don't find it restrictive. Some of the questions that we've had recently today have been, what can you do for variety? And, I always reiterate what I ask a client that comes to see me who is new to the lifestyle, who thinks that living this way is going to be restrictive. I'll ask them what they eat on a Monday, and they'll give me a list of what they eat for breakfast, lunch and dinner, so on and so forth. And then the next question is, well, what do you eat on a Tuesday? Oh, it's the same thing. We're creatures of habit, so we think this lifestyle is restrictive.
Same thing.
Yeah, but what we eat is restrictive. We're creatures of habit. We go to the supermarket, we go to the same aisles, we pick up the same items off the same shelf. We may change, the flavor of a cake or a brand or something as a treat, but generally we eat the same thing on the same day at the same time. And that's all we're doing when we gravitate into this lifestyle. It's just now the food that we get to eat is real food, is highly nutrient dense. It doesn't contain all of the toxic compounds and chemicals that the non-foods in the supermarket contains. And I think that's really important to reiterate. And the way that you can make different meals, you can cook an egg, various different ways, and it tastes different. I was saying to one of the guests earlier, a piece of beef steak tastes different to me than it does when it's minced, so there's lots of variety in things you can do.
Yeah, look, the other thing too, I think again, it's a condition and a program of, we have to have a variety of foods, and we have to have, balance and moderation. And anyone that follows me knows that I think that's complete BS. Because if you actually go to look at, those blue zone populations, and we know that, that's been cherry picked data, but there's a lady that, I don't know if you know of her, but her name's Mary Ruddick. And if anyone doesn't know her, she's brilliant. She's lived in the blue zone. She knows exactly what they eat. And variety doesn't exist there either. Their variety may look 4 or 5 things depending on what's in season, right? But here in Australia or in the US and most of the Western populations, we're told that we need to get all our antioxidants and, get 50 different types of nutrition in your acai bowl in the morning. Like, where did that come from? That came from big food trying to sell you their product. Like, as human beings, it's like if you look to the wild, a lion has a species-specific diet. So does a gorilla. So does every other animal in the world. So do we. And just because we can manufacture and make our own food, it does not mean that we need to eat it, because that's where we get sick. And I'm sure, most of your guests would have said the same thing. We are getting sicker and fatter. And why? Because we are adhering to foods that are not appropriate. And again, food is emotional. We get anchored and programmed in that, we eat for entertainment. We eat whether we're sick. That has to be undone.
Yeah.
Ask a carnivore who eats a ribeye every day if they're happy.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Natalie, do you have time for some quick questions? I can see there's a few questions. I don't have
some. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I know that I think Steve may be coming back in at some point now, but he's got all the gadgets. I don't know where he's disappeared to, but I can see some in the chat there. So there's one from Tommy here that says, "Hey, big fan here from Norway. I get contradictions regarding the fat and protein intake. You lean to more protein than fat, or am I wrong?" So I think what they're saying is, do you lean more to protein yourself over the fat, or and what's your opinion?
Myself, it changes, to be honest. It really depends on what I'm doing. I'm very, very in tune with my body. So if I'm training a little bit more, or I'm walking a little bit more, my body may say, "Hey, I need more fat," or "I need more protein." But I don't do ratio for myself. I literally eat when I'm hungry and I stop when I don't. I've never measured ketones. I've never done any of that. I just go by how it makes me feel. I have done high-fat carnivore. I loved it. But again, then my body's like, "No, well, we don't need that now." So the more that you understand the nuances in yourself, I think that's the best way, and really be aware that how you feel is exactly where you need to sit. And if you don't feel good, well, maybe up your fat, or, reduce your protein, whatever it may be. But that's the other thing too. Being used to doing that without trying to count calories or weigh your food is a whole new space for people to be in, because it's total freedom, because you actually get to listen to your body. I gave up coffee as well. I didn't really think that would make such a difference to me, but holy moly, did it. I only had 1 cup a day, and that was in the morning. But I've now been nearly 7 months actually, coffee free, and huge difference. So trust yourself. It gets very confusing, I know, when there's so many people out saying, "Hey, ratio 1-to-1," or whatever it may be, but just go by your energy. That's how your skin, your energy, your hair, your focus. Yeah. Hope that helped. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think about it too much. I just eat.
And that's exactly it. I think the key is to eat intuitively, and eat as nature intended. We back during our evolutionary period, I don't think we would have weighed out different ratios of protein and fat. We would have caught and killed our prey. We would have eaten everything, within that animal from nose to tail. Some parts of that animal are lean, some parts are fatty. And that's why I tend to eat as nature intended. As a rough ratio, if we look at it, then the ratios are pretty close to 50-50. An egg is around 6 grams of protein to 5 grams of fat, for example. And if we look at that ratio across the animal kingdom, it's there as nature intended. But I think that's the best thing we could do, is just eat as nature intended without overthinking it. I know there are issues in regards to maybe gravitating into the diet and having leptin resistance and so on and so forth. But I think for me, it does come back to eating intuitively, providing, we're not leptin resistant. But yeah, it's just eat as nature intended. I no longer track. I used to track when I was competing, but that was for a different purpose. That was to achieve a goal. I no longer track. I don't count calories. I don't track my protein. Last time I did track, I was somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 calories per day. I can't even remember where the protein or fat ratios were in that in particular. But I think you're right. I think we should do this intuitively. If you're living the lifestyle and you're feeling a little fatigued, then maybe look at increasing the fat. If you're still suffering with aches and pains, then maybe take a look at the protein. But I think it really is that simple at a base level, and then we pull the levers according to the environment and how we feel.
Yeah, exactly. The other really important thing too, just on that, it's just also, yes, food is a huge element, but I really want to talk about stress and sleeping. Again, if you're not sleeping properly and you are stressed, or you've got a stressful job and you're not actually being able to sit in stillness and kind of meditate in the present moment, that also affects how we eat. So one bad night's sleep can really affect your intake of food the next day. Also with females who are cycling, you've got 3 different phases of cycles through your menstruation. And, there's different, hormones that are coming in there, which will affect how you eat, and how you feel wanting to fast. So there's all different nuances. But once you start understanding the rhythm of your body, male, female, and sleep, cortisol, blue light, never underestimate the power of blue light on your body either. So, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And there's another question that I've just found here for you as well. Is another question from Tommy. Is carbohydrates any use? So are carbohydrates any use for muscle synthesis and growth at all? So coming from a bodybuilding background, obviously you would have used carbohydrates because you would have thought that it increases muscle protein synthesis. And I think I know where you're going to go with it, but I'll leave you run with it.
No.
In a simple answer. Yeah.
No. Hard no. And coming from both sides of the fence, I look, I will be honest, there's 3 months transition where I was coming off, sweet potato and rice and all of those kind of things when I went carnivore. It did take me 3 months, but there's no difference. Like it's actually, I will say the energy that I have when I'm training now is so different. Like I don't fatigue. I don't have any onset muscle soreness anymore. So any human being, our requirement for carbohydrates is 0. I think it's more of a mental attachment thing that we think that we're going to lose size if we do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. When we look at muscle protein synthesis, carbohydrate does not increase muscle protein synthesis. 0, nothing whatsoever. As long as adequate protein is consumed, particularly the amino acid leucine, which will activate mTOR directly. But interestingly, what does increase muscle protein synthesis is the co-ingestion of protein with fat, i.e., an evolutionarily appropriate diet, and again, eating, as nature intended. It's almost as if nature provides us with this perfectly packaged present, and in our wisdom, thinking we know better, we take the fat off that protein, which is absolutely counterintuitive. What I would add to that, I think that you're right in regards to us thinking that we need carbohydrate because it adds volume in the form of glycogen to the muscle, which I think would add some impact of leverage, which could make us stronger. But what many don't realize, and I'm sure you'll reiterate this now when I say, is that when you become adapted, we have the ability to send lactate from, and this is another reason why we don't burn the way that we used to when we were on carbohydrates. We become much more efficient at buffering those hydrogen ions. We send the lactate from the muscle to the liver, where the liver will create glucose through gluconeogenesis and send it back to the muscle, arguably at a higher rate than even yourself as your counterpart as a carbohydrate athlete, which means we do have muscle glycogen. And I think we can also manipulate that further with things like creatine monohydrate and correct electrolyte supplementation. So it isn't it's not a lost game, is it? We don't need carbohydrate, I believe, for any form of athletic performance, size, strength, or even building muscle?
Yeah, look, the other thing I'd really like to add is, if we look at nature and species, if we look at, tribes and, they forage, they hunt, that's our ancestral behavior. And, again, it's that dopamine thing that we naturally need to earn. But I think as a human too, and the way our bodies are meant to actually function, you've got to look to those tribal states of human ancestral. They're very lean. They do have muscle, but, again, that's how you're allowed to go and forage and hunt for food. I think where we've lost our way, I think in the health and fitness and bodybuilding industry, is we're doing things that are not natural to our bodies. Even the way we train, I think over a long period of time, that gets us into trouble with joint issues. And, obviously if you're on a carbohydrate issue and you're using heavy weights, I think it's just a matter of understanding the most athletic response you can have for your body is a primal state and feeding it such. And again, also ask yourself why. If you're really wanting to build your body into a certain way, is it only for an internal purpose because it makes you feel good, or is it for an external purpose? I always say to people, if you want to do something, do it, great. But if no one saw you, would you still do it?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Fantastic. Is there any form of training? I mean, you mentioned about, damage caused through incorrect training. Are there any types of training that you would implement? There's a protocol in particular that I would implement myself, but I'd be curious to hear if you have a specific protocol to limit damage and maximize maybe muscle building and athletic performance in general.
Yeah, I do. I actually am more now into more movement strength, as in, training yourself out of alignment. So, core strength. I still do weights, but I do it in a very different way. I kind of mimic what nature would do. Like if I was out in a tribe, how would I train? I wouldn't be lifting, or a Smith bar or a Smith machine bar in nature, right? So I kind of really look at what nature I can do. And what I mean by training out of alignment, that's sitting in squat positions, it's rolling your ankles, it's, training your body to be more mobile. So mobility training and strength training as well. Because if you're continually doing the same type of bodybuilding movement over and over and over, you're not training out of alignment. So that's where injuries can happen. You walk along and you go for a run and your ankle rolls. But if you're not training every single part of your body to actually, move in a different way, you're eventually going to get yourself into trouble, which is what I did.
Yeah.
I used to have very bad hips from, all the squatting. Now I don't.
Yeah. And again, I think it's that bro science in the gym, isn't it? Someone tells you who seems to be gaining that muscle in the gym, or they must know what they're doing. But there's lots of misinformation. But we just had a super chat come through on Steve's channel. And I think you've just answered this, but I'll ask the question because it's there. But do you prefer lifting to failure or reps in reserve or a mix?
So I'm more of a push and pull. So I'll generally do a full body where I'll be push legs and pull upper arms, for example, or back. But I will only ever do 2 sets. I will contract those sets. I will go to where I'm at failure, but I hold every single part of the movement. So I used to train very differently. So 3 sets to literally heavier, heavier, heavier. I used to do drop sets. I used to do, what was the other one? The one where you, hypertrophy training, did like that. So for me, I literally just do the best that I can, control my breath, control my muscle, upward and downward, and make sure that I'm feeling every single part of that. And 2 sets, maximum 12 to 13 reps. And that's it. And I don't cardio. I do not do cardio, as in I don't run. I don't walk on a treadmill. I walk. The only reason I walk is because I also put my body into a state with circadian rhythm. So I'm up very early with the sunrise. That's when I will walk. That's just purely because I love it. It makes me feel good. I'm not doing it to lose weight, but that's my daily routine.
Yeah, fantastic. And interestingly, I didn't do any cardio when I was bodybuilding. One, because I believe it's counterintuitive to the goal you're trying to achieve. But secondly, it was to prove a point on how powerful this lifestyle was. When you are a fat burner and you're tapped into those systems, it's way easier to lose body fat. And I think that was key to me being able to achieve some of those things. But I didn't do any cardio. The competitors that I would compete against, they were ramping up cardio day after day. So they'd do an hour in the gym, and then they'd go for a 20-minute run. Then it was a 30-minute run, then a 40. And in the end, they were doing 2 hours of running after an hour in the gym, which to me is only going to further increase cortisol and lead to further muscle wasting. And it just seems absolutely counterintuitive.
Yes.
But they wouldn't have it any other way. They wouldn't resign to the fact there was a better way, in order to do this. But
the amount of time I look back now and I'm like, I was in the gym for 2 hours a day. And then I would have to get up in the morning and go for a walk, like insane madness. And even, appearing on stage, you could, even though you've, really bad, you've, got to kind of dehydrate yourself to get up there, but you still look inflamed. You still look puffy to an extent, right? But again, now my whole physique has changed. But again, I value my physique and my mental and my metabolic health very differently now, whereas before it was just, as we said, very external. So I love training this way now. It feels so good.
Yeah, I agree. Just circling back really quickly, I mean, you mentioned the controlled reps. Is it safe to assume that you were concentrating more on eccentric movements? So just for the listeners, this is rather than exploding up, it's concentrating and, as you say, holding the weight.
Yes.
So eccentric movements. And one other question, if you don't mind, this has just popped up.
Yep.
Perfect. Question from Danny C. Can you build muscle using bands only? Do you have any good regimen for this?
I don't use bands myself. I don't tend to like them. I prefer just to use the weights, but control the movement. I find that now my body has built far more, I guess, healthier muscle, and I look totally different from a body composition wise compared to where I used to. So look, if you love bands and you want to, burn your booty, great. But, it really just depends on, what your goal is. Like, what are you doing it for? Like, I always ask people, if you're going to do something, what's the why behind it and what's the value exchange behind it? I don't do anything now that doesn't have a high value for me, hence why I don't run on a treadmill. It's not a value to me. So if you like bands, use them. If you don't.
Love it.
But can you build muscle on them? Don't think you can build muscle. You can tone the muscle, but you actually need to have the resistance of a greater weight to do that.
Yeah. I know Steve's a big fan of bands.
But again, if your protein intake's not right and your fat intake's not right either, you're not going to do that well.
Yeah, I agree. Steve, welcome back.
I've been watching.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. My Wi-Fi took me out basically, and I realised that when I'd gone, your signal was better. So I just sat here in the side, just watching and listening. So yes, that was brilliant, Natalie. That was fabulous, and well hosted, Richard. We've got Mr. Abs waiting, Dr. Abs waiting to come on to do his next shift. But
awesome.
Natalie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Love talking to you all the time.
Yeah. Thanks again, Natalie. Massively appreciated. Some fantastic information. A pleasure as always. And yeah, if we do this again next year, obviously we'll be tapping you back up for another stint. If we do it again next year.
Thank you.
Right. Bye, Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for everybody for asking questions. Bye.
Excellent. So, Sabrina, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
we'll see you next year then.
Yep, my pleasure, guys. Get some rest after this, eat some meat, and yeah, we'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye. There you go.